Deep Dive Film School makes no claim of ownership of the film footage used in this episode. The film footage is owned entirely by the copyright holders. Also, we're going to spoil the hell out of this movie, so this is your warning. Welcome to Deep Dive Film School!
This week we're going to kick off a new festival, our No Capes Festival, with 2002 Sam Mendes film, Road to Perdition.
Let's dive on in. All right, everybody, I am Adam Sherlock.
And I'm Adam Poulter.
And if you like what you see/hear, please like and subscribe. You can find us in all the spaces and places that people what?
Find good media.
Oh, I've got him trained like a Pavlovian dog. So this festival was my idea. I wanted to call it the No Capes Festival because as someone who I truly do love graphic novels so much, but when you tell somebody like, oh, I love comic books, I love graphic novels, they're usually like, what's your favorite Marvel movie?
Yeah.
And I'm like, they're fine. Like, they're fine. Like, it's fine. Right? It's like,
So what's your favorite Marvel movie?
Probably like one of the Guardians of the No, Thor Ragnarok. That is my favorite. But you know, it's like Marvel movies or even like Marvel comic books. Like, it's fine. It's like you're like, oh, let's get something nice. Let's go to Zupa's, right? And you're like, it's not awful, but it's also not adventurous. Now, what I love is stuff like Art Spiegelman with his graphic novel Mouse, or things like Chris Ware's books, whether that be Jimmy Corrigan's Smartest Boy in the World or Rusty Brown. Like, I love these much more experimental Neil Gaiman, Sandman. That's kind of straddling the line because it was a DC property, but still, yes, very much more in the realm of something like Neil Gaiman. And so what I wanted to do was something that was a no capes. You know, and this is for anybody out there who reads graphic novels. Every time that I say comic book, you're going to be like, ugh. But I'm saying it for the masses, is a no capes comic book movie festival. So What are the ones that are something different that doesn't really have anything to do with superheroes? Now, we did do V for Vendetta, which I think
qualifies,
it does and it doesn't, because V also is kind of a swashbuckling character, but the overall story is something much more serious.
Yeah, and on top of Road to Perdition, we're going to be doing Persepolis.
Yes. We'll be doing My Friend Dahmer. As well as Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
Of course. And as a bonus punishment review, we will be doing Dick Tracy, which I cannot wait for.
It's going to be really good. And my wife is so disappointed that we're doing it as a punishment review, because she had Dick Tracy sheets on her bed when she was a little girl.
Maybe she should do it with us.
Maybe she should, and she'll the whole time be like, no. But I'm very excited.
Did you show her the trailer?
Yeah, and the whole time she was like, that's great. And I was like, it's not. Your nostalgia is clouding your better judgment. And I understand.
It happens to the best.
It happens to the best of us. It really does. But we're starting off the festival with Road to Perdition. It's a 2002 film based on a graphic novel from 1998. Max Allan Collins.
David Self did the screenplay.
Yes.
And also directed by Sam Mendes, like we mentioned at the beginning. American Beauty, Revolutionary Road.
Yes.
1917.
The 6 Feet Under series.
That's Alan Ball.
But didn't he also direct several episodes? I thought Mendes did. I wouldn't be
surprised. And Jarhead, he did a James Bond movie too, I think, at some point. So he actually, like, after American Beauty came out, he became like
one of those go-to guys.
Director who was getting every script possible, probably. And
I mean, looking at his work here, it's kind of cool to see him do
this one, which is kind of, it's kind of got a Miller's Crossing feeling to it.
Oh, that's a great
bit.
comparison.
I could feel that with Road to Perdition, and you just have so many. It's just a really solid movie, right?
Yeah.
It's just like really well done, especially for the early 2000s.
This is 2002.
Yeah,
and
great cast.
Well, and I think that like the you said Miller's Crossing. I think that's such a great comparison. But this 1930s sort of outside of Chicago,
height of the Depression, right?
Height of the Depression. We're just edging into sort of like the real industrial age, like a lot of homes. Another movie that I thought a lot about was Angel Heart. We're at this point where it's like a ballpoint pen is like a new invention because everybody's been using quill pens. It's like, you have these like seedy speakeasies that people are hanging out at, and this is like Irish gangster world.
Yeah. Gangster's son essentially witnesses a murder, and it's kind of the chase is on. We'll get to that part, of course.
Yes.
But I have not watched this movie in forever.
Same here.
It's been a long time, so it was really fun to revisit. I'm super glad we chose this one. Where do we want to start with this? I mean, I think what really holds this movie together, it's a great story, but the characters here, Paul Newman doing pretty much his last serious movie.
I mean, one of his last performances.
Tom Hanks, obviously amazing, but also playing against type a bit.
I think he's totally playing against type here, but I also think it's really interesting, and it's one thing that I thought about while watching it this time, is I love seeing Hank play against type as this character that really is like a strong man for this Mr.
Rarely is he this ruthless, though, right?
Exactly, and Mr. Rooney, Paul Newman's character, he's sort of the strong man for Mr. Rooney. But he also has a heart, but he's a complicated character. And it's one of the very first things we hear in this little voiceover that's really just the beginning of the end. It's these bookends.
By the beach.
Yeah, and that's pulled directly from the graphic novel of this, like, when people ask me about Michael Sullivan.
6 weeks together in 1931.
And I wonder what it would have been like if you had more of and maybe not Daniel Craig because he's too young here, but I'm even thinking of like a Sean Bean kind of a character that could have played the Michael Sullivan character, because again, this stunt casting idea of like, well, let's get a Tom Hanks who we do trust and love. It's easy for us to, he does some horrible things in this movie, but it's also easy for us to couch ourselves in like,
no doubt.
At the end of the day, he's a good guy. It's fucking Tom Hanks. He's a good guy,
doing
right?
What he had to do to get by. Leave him alone.
Yeah, leave him alone. He's trying to be a good guy. And so, but if you had somebody who could maybe come across as a little bit more duplicitous, you might have a more interesting thing happen here.
Well, yeah, and obviously, like, from his son's point of view, he's very reserved with them. It seems to a degree.
Stoic.
They show the family life here. You have Jennifer Jason Leigh, who plays his wife. I don't know if you noticed, but kind of how Mendes shot this movie was every time you saw Tom Hanks in probably the first half of the movie, he's behind a door, behind some glass, or just shot in the background. And over the movie, as they kind of go on this road trip,
he gets closer, more and more into focus,
which makes a ton of sense.
Oh, that's really interesting.
With the father-son story here, and so just little subtle things like that just make this just kind of. I could easily see this be a forgotten gem.
It very much is. It very much is, and I think. I mean, let's just get this out of the way to begin with. In my opinion, I totally like it's as you said, like, oh yeah, it's Road to Perdition. That's a good one. Going back and watching it, I'm like, there are maybe 10 different insanely tense, beautifully written and directed and acted scenes
so good.
In this movie. And I think one of the, like, if you want to do like an exposition 101, like what to do kind of a moment, let's start with this wake. Right?
Yeah.
We have this wake is so interesting to set up the inner workings of this gang.
A lot going on if you're paying attention.
Who Mr. Rooney is. I always mess up his name, but Ciarán Hinds.
Ciarán Hinds, yep.
Is absolutely fantastic here as like the guy who's
the brother,
yeah. And that like the second that he gets up to speak, which is obviously this like theatrical fanfare that they must be like, oh, well, we need him to do this. Like, we need him to, this is what's going to button the deal of like, oh, mistakes were made. This is something that happens, and we never even know exactly what it was other than they thought he was stealing. They took him out. And when Ciarán Hinds, when Ciarán Hinds gets up to talk, we immediately see both Daniel Craig's character, who performs as Connor, the son of Mr. Rooney, the unloved, unwanted son of Mr. Rooney.
For a good reason.
For a good reason. He is a total slimeball. And then Michael Sullivan, Tom Hanks' character, who is the son that Mr. Rooney always wanted and really took under his wing because he was fatherless. We see both of them edging through this crowd because they're like, don't get sloppy. Don't you do that. Don't you do that here at the wake, right? But then on top of that, the grand tapestries and the dusty wallpaper, the ice around the casket that's dripping down into those urns, like the amount of detail happening here, you know, the old wood that's just like in every parlor room. It's just this version of America that doesn't exist anymore that's beautifully set up here by Mendes.
That's totally true. It's funny, like the aspects here that I think kind of go underrated a little bit. I was reading an article with the costume designer, and she talked about how hard it was to find clothes because this was Depression era and everything was just bland. God. And so she had to create and dye all of these old different clothes, which it looks so good. And I think it ended up winning for cinematography, which it looks amazing. And Paul Newman's amazing.
Oh my God.
But the Newman I want to talk about, who I think is underrated, is Thomas Newman. He writes the score. He did the score for American Beauty, and he has
score is so good.
And he did 6 Feet Under as well. But it's one of those. For some reason, what he does really sticks out to me.
It's like violins and bagpipes,
something
and
like
something traditional.
Yeah, I don't know. There's something about it that is very distinctly him. But it's so fun in this movie. Like American Beauty, it's really fun and prominent as well. But this movie, especially we're on the road stuff, and they're going through like, you know, the bank robbery like montage and stuff like that. It just seems like a fun adventure movie, kind of like. I think he also did Lemony Snicket's maybe.
Oh, that makes sense.
You know,
yeah,
like,
you're right. He does have a real fingerprint.
Underrated, but I've always thought since American Beauty that I was like, that's a really interesting score. And costumes don't really get talked about a lot as aspects.
Yeah.
And I think those two things stood out to me as underrated in this movie.
I completely agree. Well, it's the detail, and I think that's one of the reasons why I mention Angel Heart, is that there is this level of like texture and detail when we get to the nightclubs later, or again, even in this wake scene, the coins on the eyes. Like there's all these little bits and pieces that make you feel like you're in this real lived-in space that, again, because it's so long ago, it's almost 100 years ago, it has this feeling to it of it being this alien place. So the more detail that you can add into that, the more that it can feel like this might be a true story. Now, interestingly, I did want to mention really quickly that Collins, who wrote the graphic novel, based Michael Sullivan Sr. on Dan Drost, who was a member of Connor Looney's gang in that era, in 1920s, but was a member of the gang. Very similar events happened. He was
loosely based on.
He was double crossed. His family was annihilated for it, and so Dan Drost orchestrated a mob hit that ended the entire Looney gang. He took all of them out. Wow. So like that part of the story that feels like
Michael
the most
Corleone style.
Yeah, that feels the most cinematic or like unrealistic, that you're like, well, somebody couldn't actually do that. It's like, actually, that's the part that's real, is that a guy did that and was like, all right, you killed my family, I'm taking all of you out.
I mean, the Daniel Craig performance here, underrated performance. I honestly forgot he was in the movie because it's so early in his career.
He's so scary. He's so creepy.
Well, he's that Joker type mentality of a character who just wants to see the world burn, or just wants to cover their ass, and it's hard to tell which one he really wants to do, because he's doing some ruthless stuff that could just be figured out, but he just goes straight without asking anybody and just blows up Paul Newman's world. You know, Paul Newman is very close with Michael Sullivan and both of his boys.
Yes, and his wife.
And
like
family.
Just yeah,
and Connor goes and takes him out. And because MJ, Michael Jr., witnesses a murder of Syrian Hines.
Yeah. That again, Michael Sullivan's character, Hanks's character, doesn't know is about to happen. But my God,
they're supposed to just talk to him, right?
Once that switch gets flipped, and he has that Tommy gun, he's scary. But again, you talk about Joker, boy, that to the younger son, why are you always smiling? Because it's also fucking hysterical, right?
Yeah.
That line, but then. Here's the thing. Again, in Show Don't Tell 101, still at the wake, Hanks's character sits down with Paul Newman's character and they play a piano song together.
Yeah.
And we look at Daniel Craig and he's smiling in the most uncomfortable way where tears are welling up in his eyes. And we're like,
Definitely
again,
some jealousy there.
we're not even 10 minutes into the movie and we know everything that we need to know.
Mm-hmm.
Like if the story had just been about that power struggle and not the family annihilation, that already would be movie worthy. But instead, this is all just setup. This is all set dressing for the story that's to come.
For sure. And, you know, Connor, I think, probably has the attitude of like, hey, I'm the up and coming guy. You're just a bunch of old guys. Like, don't talk to me like that. You know, trying to distinguish his power. But there's no way that Paul Newman didn't feel responsible, not only for the brother that got killed, because he's hosting the wake, but also for what happens to the Sullivan family.
Well, and we get it when we get that little nugget there right before Syrian Hines dies, which is what. You know who may be embezzling? It's you, to Connor. And he's like, what have you been doing with all this time you've been spending in Chicago? And before the O from Chicago comes out, he gets killed. And it isn't until later, because at first you're like, oh, this is an impulsive ratty kid.
Person, yep.
And then later you're like, oh, no, he isn't. He's bleeding his own father dry. He's bleeding his own father's interests dry. And we find that out later. And that's a great sort of like subplot to the main plot. But the main plot, honestly, at the end of the day,
it's a father-son story.
It's a couple of different father-son stories.
Yeah.
It's about sons wanting to please their fathers, other sons not being able to please their father no matter what they did.
Yeah.
Like it's all about fathers and sons, and whew, I gotta tell you, bud, it hit home for me. I was like, oh God, like this is deep. This is some deep shit.
For sure. Another movie that it kind of reminded me of, and I don't know if you remember this Clint Eastwood movie, but it is the Kevin Costner Perfect World.
I love that movie.
It's so good. But
It's
it kind
so
of
damn
reminded
good.
me, even though they're not father and son, I think it had the same road trip type feel to it, and there was kind of the bonding that grows over time.
And there's the gruff guy who's like, stay in the car, damn it. You're right. That kind of an element. Like, but then there's these playful bits of like I need to teach you how to drive, because then the movie, once Sullivan's character really realizes like, I'm going to go out, I'm going to try and bleed these guys dry. He has to teach his son how to basically be like his getaway driver, which is fantastic. Now, we're jumping around a little bit. I want to talk about one of my absolute favorite scenes in the movie.
Okay.
And it is a 1-2 punch that just does such an incredible job of letting us know what is at stake, and then immediately after it, pulling the rug out from underneath us with this family annihilation scene. But it is the scene where Connor sets up Sullivan.
Yeah.
And he goes to the nightclub, and we get the super chatty door guy who's like, oh, maybe put in a good word for me with Mr. Rooney, and da-da-da-da-da. I'm like, I'm actually a boxer, and da-da. And we're following the camera down this speakeasy, and we finally get in with this like super gross slime ball boss of the speakeasy. And he opens the piece of paper that Connor has given him, and it says, kill Sullivan and all debts are cleared, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the expression on the faces of all three people while the like swing and dance music is happening right above, and it's just this pounding music, and they're all looking at each other, and you can see it on Michael Sullivan's face, the realization.
He knows he has like, to figure it out, but yeah.
I just got set up, and I just got set up by Connor, which means my family's in danger, but I have to kill these guys first. Like, all of those elements happen stacked on top of each other. And I gotta say, I totally forgot about that scene.
Yeah, it's a perfect Hitchcockian setup, right? Where, like, the double twist and someone, flips it around on you, for sure. The Hanks performance here is really... It's kind of underrated, honestly. I don't know if it gets talked about in his whole filmography as much. But his younger son, not Colin, the more famous Hanks, that is an actor, but Chet, who is also an actor.
The douchey one. The rapper?
Is he a rapper? He kind of looked like that.
Yeah, he's a rapper.
He was saying that out
up.
of all my dad's performances, this movie is the one that makes him seem the least like himself. Because always when I watch him, I can see him just being in there somewhere. Yeah. But this one was the most You know, he's kind of stern when he needs to be. Quick to the gun and quick to violence, I think, just because of his upbringing and the world that he lives in, that you have to be. But I'd put it up there with some of Hank's top performances, I feel like.
It's one of the most interesting.
Yeah.
It's easily one of the most interesting for those reasons you're talking about. Even going in and killing the accountant, right? Like, look, you know, you really think you're going to threaten me by putting a gun to my head? And he's like, well, then give Mr. Rooney a message from me. And he just shoots an unarmed man. And you're like, oh, okay. Because everything that we've seen before, we're like, well, he's here to work and he's trying to do these things. But like that, you go, oh, no, he's a brutal dude, like, for sure.
Tyler Hoechlin, I think he went on to be, like, Superman or Clark Kent and a bunch of things.
Oh, yeah.
But he's really good here, and I love that he, at the beginning, his whole story is, you know, you see him with a math test, he's kind of just like, I don't care about this, and then you see his brother, and he's, like, comparing him to what Michael thinks of them, and at some point they're at the old ranch where they kind of pull aside and get some help later in the movie, and the lady in that house is like, he's a really good worker, like, look at him out there in the field working, and you kind of put together like, yeah, he's maybe not good at math, but that's okay, he's gonna be fine. And you kind of get this evolution of the father-son thing where the son asks this really honest question of like, why did you like, is it Tom or something like that more?
Fuck, and that is like such a rough question.
It is, and someone feeling isolated, right?
Yeah.
And so you want to fix that. But at the same time, he has a great answer where he's like, well, I was harder on you because you remind me more of me.
Yeah.
And
what does he say? He said,
I didn't really want that for you.
He was cute. He was like a puppy.
Yeah.
Right? And he's like,
you were more like me.
You were more like me. And that you see in Michael Jr., it instills both this weird, disjointed sadness, but also like,
though, too. Like, he gives him
pride.
Yeah.
It gives him pride too, where he's like, oh,
well,
he was harder on me because that's like,
this is the 30s, right? Like, the logistics inside of a house in the 30s in America versus what they are 90 years later here is completely different, right? The respectfulness that you had to show to your parents, and just like the intimidation factor, like there's a line drawn in the sand, but you know, just as like what role are you in this family, right?
Well, and they're also all living, you know, under this fairy tale that I think Jennifer Jason Leigh's character has kind of created, which is like, well, you know, he works for Mr. Rooney, like, and sometimes he goes on dangerous missions, right? And it's like, no, he's an assassin.
But, you know, I mean,
but no one's talking about it, right?
He comes back. I think he kind of has an idea of what his dad does, but he doesn't until he witnesses that murder. Just seeing a dead body at that age has got to be pretty frightening.
Oh yeah.
And then his dad comes back to the car with blood on his hands, and that's like, oh shit, okay, like,
this is real.
This is real.
Let's talk about Jude Law.
Yes. Him and Stanley Tucci we need to talk about.
Yes.
But Jude Law specifically, not in the graphic novel, apparently. This was created by the
screenwriter.
Whoa, I bet that Max Allan Collins was like, damn it, that was a good idea.
I could have had that character. Well, and
because
what's interesting...
he's this rat-looking person, and he's got just like dirty teeth, and is balding, and just like... just his whole presence when he walks in a room, you're just like, you. You
know, there is something really special, I have to say, about... and I talked about this forever ago when we did Ex Machina.
Harlan Maguire.
Well, this idea of like... actors who in their regular lives have... English, Irish, Scottish, or Australian, New Zealand accents, doing their version of an American accent changes who they are as a performer so deeply. Like a good example I would think of would be something like Hugh Laurie playing the Dr. House, right? Like when he's a British actor, he's the foppish guy from Blackadder, where he's like, oh, right? And like, that's who you know him as. And then all of a sudden he does an American accent and he talks like this and he's a sociopath. And you're like, oh my God, I love that character. He's a total hard ass.
Yeah.
And the same thing is true here with Jude Law, who historically is like one of the most charming British actors, right? I mean, you love him so much because he can, like, all the women when he leaves the room are like, oh my God. And here he's like, hey, darling.
Yeah.
And you're like, ew, gross. Like, what's wrong with this guy, right?
Well,
obviously the fake teeth and the balding head
but
help.
also when I meant walking in a room, just what he does and how he does it, and the creepiness behind him taking pictures and having this almost Nightcrawler setup of where you go and like, hey, here's some cash, give me 5 minutes.
And then like, oh, the guy's not dead yet, so he's ruining my shot.
He's got a ham radio or something that he can hear all of this stuff.
So here's an interesting thing, and I know I've talked about this author before because I'm such a huge fan of him, but the writer Luc Sante, who wrote the book Low Life, that was about really gangsters in the turn of the century, 1920s, 1930s, New York. Yep. While he was researching that book, was given access to the old crime files from different unsolved deaths in New York, and turned it into a coffee table book called Evidence. And it really is, it's a brilliant book because all of the different old negatives from the crime scene photos were not attached to any information. And so what Luc Sante did was he turned it into a coffee table book. He redeveloped all the photos, and it's really interesting because of the way they aged. The photos all have these weird white kind of halos around them from age. And so when you look at them, they're gorgeous, but also terrifying because it's like you can see people's brains out and stuff like that. And every single one of them, when there was a top-down photo, you can see the weird spindly legs of the wooden tripod around it. Makes very surreal imagery. Wow. But the thing that's great about the book is then he went through different microfiche of unsolved crimes or crimes that were documented at the time in the newspaper, and he puts them all in the back and is like, maybe it's this one, maybe it's this one, who knows? But like, here are the 5 that seem the closest related to this, is that this was a mob hit. The reason why I bring all this up is because when we meet Jude Law's character and he gets his phone call from Stanley Tucci to like, hey, I want you to go and assassinate Michael Sullivan and his son. We see him in his house. All the photos behind him are from the Evidence book.
Interesting.
So
he's based on a real guy named Ouija, right?
Yes, but all of those photographs, like all the ways that they look, whether it's the guy who got stabbed in the chest when we very first meet him, to the very end of the movie where he's trying to take a picture of Michael Sullivan, the look of those photos, including the actual real photos up behind him, all based upon the book Evidence, so cool. Which is one of the reasons why that movie, to me, when I first saw this movie, when that showed up, you know, it's like hearing a song from one of your favorite bands in a movie, and you're like, somebody else knows about that rad thing that I know about?
Mendes is a really interesting director, right? Like,
yeah, oh yeah.
The choices he makes, and like, you know, like, it'd be interesting to watch American Beauty now. With all the shit that went down with Kevin Spacey, but
I had problems with it last time we reviewed it about a decade ago.
Sure, yeah, that's right, you did. But for the most part, like the way it's made from a filmmaking perspective is brilliant.
Yes.
And if you go on to look at some of his other stuff, even more recently, like 1917, which is all one shot, or
that's
made
right.
to look like one shot, which is
a
brilliant movie. But he really does different shit every time. He's one of those directors who doesn't do the same movie twice, and I know we both love directors like that. So
I love that.
Kind of interesting. This movie, though, is truly full of underrated performances, right? Jude Law, Daniel Craig, Tom Hanks, Paul Newman. Like, Stanley Tucci is awesome here. Mr. Needy.
He's like a second fiddle Capone.
Yeah.
Like, he's almost Capone, but
yeah.
he's your first guy doing smaller stuff in Chicago. He's not fully Capone, but he's close to it.
He has this great line with Connor at one point. He's like, I can take care of myself. He's like, no, you can't.
That's the point.
You're a big baby who doesn't know his thumb from his dick. Which is like, there's actually some genuinely funny lines in this movie and funny moments, especially with Michael and Michael Jr. Like when they start robbing banks and he is like, when do I get my cut of the money? You know, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But
could I have had more? And he's like, you'll never know.
But back to
so good.
Yeah, of course, and you know that's coming, right? But back to the Jude Law scene and the few scenes that they share together, the diner scene.
That's another one of these incredible scenes.
Wow.
Yeah. So high tension.
And really, it's really the tension that happens before everything realizes, you know, because Michael's smart. He's one step ahead of everyone, or at least can recognize when something's off. He's got that instinctual side to him, but just Jude Law trying to get comfortable is just like eerie, right?
Oh, he's so creepy.
And he's trying to be like a normal guy, and he's so not. And like it's obvious that dead bodies bring him like joy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. He loves it.
Whether he did it or someone else did it.
Yeah.
You know, it's why he's taking pictures of it. For a character to not be in the original source material and to be created and fit so seamlessly into what they're doing.
Yes.
Now, I think in the graphic novel as well, Michael Jr. kind of goes, he doesn't just drive for him. I think he goes on to like a killing spree with them.
The whole like, I couldn't do it. I couldn't shoot him. That whole aspect is added into the screenplay.
It's because it goes back to that conversation of them. He's saying you're more like me, and I don't want you to be.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, no, and that's the thing is I think that so often we see, whether it be in a book where they have more time to breathe with it. Or a play or these different things where they're like, oh, we're going to do this and it's going to be a 6-hour thing or it's going to be a 15-hour thing. And you're like, okay, we need this thing to be less than 2 hours. How do we do it? A lot of times that can really cut out stuff that's important.
For sure.
But
it's a rated R movie though, you know, and so you kind of wonder like, will that lose an audience? Will that, you know, if you start seeing this kid killing people like his dad in the 30s, would that really happen?
But to your point, trimming the fat means that you get down to the essence of who a character is, right? And we see it all the time. We see, and I can't think of any good examples off the top of my head, but you think of movies where you have like, you know, 3 or 4 love interests who get boiled down to a single person, 3 or 4 nemesis who get boiled down to a single person, and then that ends up making that version of it so much more streamlined. And so much more interesting because another person who is also a great storyteller came in and went, okay, how do we
make this better?
How do we pull this together and still stay true to the overall vision? So really loving the graphic novel. I feel like it had been several years since I read it, but I remember it being different and being bummed that Jude Law's character isn't in there because I'm like, oh, I wanted to see because I saw the movie first, and then I got the graphic novel. But you know, I think that it's also like that. It's a we even see it in things like Harry Potter Harry Potter movie adaptations or Lord of the Rings movie adaptations, where I'm like, there are things about those I like more than the original source material because they had to streamline ideas, and like that's a group effort. No doubt. And so I appreciate it when it happens.
Final thing I want to say, just a few shots I want to talk about that were just kind of just breathtaking. When they go to Chicago and you get all the hats walking down the street, right? Like,
brilliant.
Amazing. And that's all real. And all the cars in the background, that shit's real.
Yeah.
And they're in Chicago shooting that stuff. So it looks amazing. Then, of course, we have to talk about the silent massacre at the end.
So tastefully done. Just...
yeah.
A masterpiece of a scene.
It really is. I forgot about that scene. And when it started and the music's swelling and you know like something's coming, I was like, oh fuck, he's in the shadows.
Yeah, he's out there.
About this.
And not with a pistol, with his Tommy gun.
Yep.
Which is like
mowing down dudes.
The Tommy gun is literally the lawnmower equivalent of a gun. Like it is just like when you gotta get the job done. And the fact that Mr. Rooney says, I'm glad it was you. And Michael says nothing and mows him down again. I mean, he empties his clip into the dude. And you're just like...
His father figure.
Yeah.
And then, of course, this scene... You know, there's no real big standoff in this movie or anything. I guess maybe the Jude Law part at the very end, you could call that. Maybe.
A little bit.
But that's not really who he cares about. That's not where his emotions are wrapped up in, right? And so...
You're talking about how he takes out Connor?
Yeah, and
God,
that's so the other shot.
Cold-blooded.
It is, and like that's what you love about Tom Hanks' character here is that he will go to those depths, but the way they shot it too, where you just get this reflection passing the mirror of him. You know,
by the time the gun pops,
a lesser movie would have them chase each other for 15-20 minutes,
or
right?
even blah 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 blah. Blah 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 clap. But instead it's like there is a more interesting interaction between him and the accountant than his interaction with Connor. But I love that because it shows the futility of revenge, right? That and it's funny because in a couple episodes, we'll be doing that one scene that's about the inverse of this, like the non-futility of revenge, the beauty and the heart-wrenchingness of revenge. But here, this is a more real world that this movie is trying to put us in, and the revenge is not sexy. The revenge is, let me do the thing I need to do. And what I need to do is I can't bring my wife back and I can't bring my son back. So I just need to splatter this guy's brains across the wall. And I don't even need to take a picture of it. I just need to make sure it's done.
Yeah.
And that's what he does. And it's utilitarian.
Great movie, great revisit. Wow.
Last thing I just want to say is, if you're building a good villain, please, screenwriters, go back and watch these amazing moments with Mr. Rooney conflicted.
Oh, just like in front of the fire, just
he hates his son, and his son has done it again. Yeah. He's ruined things again, and now he has to actually put to death the guy he wanted to be his son.
He's not going to do it though.
Right. Like that.
Michael offers.
Oh my God. It is so, like just that turmoil that he's going through makes for one of the most fascinating characters. And I'll say this, one of the most fascinating characters I've seen Paul Newman play.
Yeah.
Like he it's not just the stunt casting of like,
swan song for him a bit,
it right? really is, because it's not
I know
just
he
like
has Cars, and I know that's very dear to you.
Wait, oh God, who is he? Is that his last performance?
Cars was.
Oh no, it's a Raul Julia and Street Fighter moment. Fuck, that's awful. Who is he in Cars?
He's the old race car.
Oh God, oh Pixar. If you know that they're close, be like, you don't have to do this.
Ed Asner just passed away, so
this is what I'm saying. Well, at least, okay, I take it back, because that's different.
So that's what I'm saying. Like
he was not a talking car.
He also, that's true. He also
it's on his tombstone.
Not a talking car.
He was never a talking car.
Also, Up was made like 10 years ago, probably.
Yeah,
so.
but I mean, my God, that opening. Well, that'll be on that one scene from. We'll do the opening of
Cars.
Of Up. All right, you guys. This has been great. If you like what you see/hear, please like and subscribe. You can find us in all those spaces and places.
Absolutely. Next week, we're going to have that one scene from Once Upon a Time in the West. Please check that out. And to continue the festival, we'll do Persepolis, the French animated film, which I'm very excited to talk about.
Me too.
All right.
Thanks,
everyone.
Bye, you guys.